Emily and I had been married for 12 years, and we'd been together since we were just kids, 10 years old, to be exact. I didn't bother with college after high school, deciding to jump right into work as an entry-level draftsman at Desmond Engineering. A year later, Emily and I made it official, and not long after that, we became parents to our twin girls, Lily and Sophie. It wasn't easy at first, but we managed by budgeting smartly, making sure every penny counted. Even though I was still just a draftsman, I worked my way up a few levels, which helped us out financially. We could afford a small house, and we had 2 decent cars, not flashy, but they weren't clunkers either. Emily was thrilled to live out her dream of being a stay-at-home mom, and thanks to the stability my job provided, she didn't have to work. We were both in good shape, too. Emily had put on a little weight since our wedding, but at just over 5 feet tall with her dark brown hair and bangs, she still kind of looked like a mini Marie Osmond. As for me, I was pretty much the same as I was back when I played right tackle on the high school football team. About a year ago, Jake Foster moved from Lancaster to Reading and took a job with Desmond Engineering as a surveyor. We had played football against each other back in the day and hit it off right away. Like me, Jake had also married his high school sweetheart, a redhead named Anna. Anna and Emily became instant best friends. They didn't have kids yet, but they were great with ours, always stepping in as unofficial nannies. When Jake and I weren't at work, we hung out a lot. It was a good way to take a break from the usual family routine. Naturally, Emily and Anna did the same. They'd go on shopping trips, hit up parties and club events, while Jake and I would kick back and watch the game or relax. Anna had also gotten a job as a secretary at Gilbert Engineering, just outside of town. But about 6 months ago, things started to shift, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. What used to be a once-a-month PDA meeting for Emily suddenly became a weekly thing. And Anna, who didn't even have kids, seemed to be at our house all the time. The number of Tupperware and Magic Chef parties they attended seemed to go up every month, but they never came back with anything. They also joined a book club, though they never seemed to actually read any books. Their weekend shopping trips would last for hours, but they hardly bought anything. Meanwhile, Emily's collection of fancy lingerie was growing, but oddly enough, I wasn't seeing any of it. It all started to get to me. I never brought it up with Jake, though. He didn't seem to notice or care, and I wasn't about to stir up trouble unless I knew for sure something was wrong. One night, after putting the girls to bed, Emily came home from yet another basket party. The first thing she did was hop into the shower, which was strange because she had already showered before Anna picked her up. That definitely raised some red flags. While she was in the bathroom, I took a quick look at the basket she brought home, and inside was a set of black lace lingerie. I couldn't help but wonder, who wears something like that to a basket party? I'm not in the habit of snooping through my wife's things, but that night, curiosity got the better of me. I checked her underwear and, to my shock, found them wet and sticky. I slipped them into my pocket, feeling uneasy. Up until that night, I had never once gone through Emily's purse or her phone. But something inside me snapped. I opened her phone and was surprised to see she hadn't even bothered to delete her call history from the past week. Most of the calls were to Anna, which made sense, but there were a lot of other numbers too, marked as KC, KH, and KW. I had no clue who they were, but after thinking it over, I realized C stood for cell, H for home, and W likely meant work. When I checked her contact list, I saw Anna had 3 numbers listed too: Anna C, Anna H, and Anna W. That's when it hit me. Anna was more involved in this than I thought. I was getting a clearer picture. The number marked as KW was the same as Anna's work number, just with a different extension. It wasn't hard to figure out that Emily was talking to someone who worked with Anna, and Anna had probably introduced them. What I didn't expect was that this KW was connected to Gilbert Engineering, the place Anna worked at, which had recently closed its doors. I took Emily's phone and dialed KW's number. It went straight to the voicemail of a guy named Tom Reed, telling me he wasn't available and to leave a message. I hung up before the beep. It was too easy. Just then, Emily poked her head in the doorway and asked if I was coming to bed. I mumbled something about almost finishing my book and might fall asleep on the couch. But honestly, I had no plans to share a bed with her that night. My mind was racing, trying to figure out where things had gone wrong, or if there was something I could have done differently. It was a waste of mental energy, really, but I couldn't help myself. I kept looking at the clock, watching the minutes drag by, as the same thoughts spun in my head over and over. One thing was clear, though. I wasn't going to take the blame for whatever was happening. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my girls making breakfast. Emily had clearly encouraged them to handle it themselves. It was cute and seemed to work well enough. While I stretched and tried to wake up, Emily strolled in and casually mentioned that I should get a move on, or I'd be late for work. I told her I wasn't going in that day. Too many personal problems, I said. She seemed a bit taken aback by that, but didn't ask any questions. I yawned and headed for the bathroom to shower. When I came back, Emily looked confused, probably because the girls had already left for school. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. She was staring at me, like she knew something was coming but didn't know what. I cut straight to the chase and told her I wanted to hear all about her book club, though I doubted she'd come clean easily. Emily sat there, giving me this look, and then she asked if my bad mood was because I thought she was cheating on me. I didn't bother sugarcoating it. I told her I was suspicious and that we needed to talk about this novel she'd been working on. She had the nerve to act shocked, like she couldn't believe I would even think that after 12 years of marriage. But I wasn't in the mood for her fake innocence. I pushed her, saying I didn't have time to play games and had other things to deal with, like work. She leaned forward with this almost affectionate sigh and said, "There's nothing romantic in my novel." She sounded so sure of herself, like she expected me to buy it. I threw back a sarcastic "sure, that's believable," but told her I wasn't impressed by her little performance. She sat back, sipped her coffee, as if she was already in control of the conversation. It irritated me how calm she seemed, like she was the one holding all the cards. I decided to hit her with some questions, and to my surprise, she agreed. I asked her why she was suddenly attending PDA meetings every week, when the PDA secretary had told me they only held them monthly, and that Emily hadn't even shown up in months. For a moment, she looked confused, less cocky than before, as if she was trying to figure out where I was going with this. I laid it out plainly. She and Anna were supposedly going to these PDA meetings every Tuesday, and I wanted to know why she would lie about something like that. Emily took her time thinking it over, and then finally, she apologized, explaining that she and Anna had actually been going to Rosie's Cantina for ladies' night, enjoying 2-for-1 margaritas. She claimed they didn't tell me because they didn't want me or Jake to misunderstand. Yeah, right. She promised to keep me in the loop from now on, but I wasn't buying her excuses. I told her flat out that I'd be checking into her story, and maybe I'd ask Anna. Or better yet, I'd ask someone at Rosie's. She just rolled her eyes and told me I was making a mountain out of a molehill, like I was the one causing trouble. Then, she switched the conversation, pointing fingers at me, asking why I took showers before and after going to those little Tupperware parties. I explained that the women there smoked like chimneys, and I didn't want the smell stuck in my hair. But she wasn't done. She asked why I'd wear nice underwear to those parties but never for her, unless it was a special occasion. That question caught me off guard. I didn't really have an answer, so I told her I just liked feeling a bit more dressed up when I went out. It wasn't a great explanation, but it was the truth. At that point, her lies were starting to get under my skin. I could feel my anger rising, and I knew it was time to cut through the nonsense. I pulled out the soiled underwear I'd found the night before and threw them on the table. "Explain this," I demanded, my voice sharp. I told her I knew the stuff on them wasn't mine, and she better not try to sell me the old yeast infection excuse. She was visibly nervous, avoiding eye contact, clearly scrambling for something to say. But she couldn't come up with anything fast enough. I pressed her harder, my patience wearing thin. "Why did you come home with dirty underwear?" I asked, my frustration boiling over. "Tell me the truth." She started to break down, telling me to stop, saying she couldn't take it anymore. She played the victim card, asking how I could treat her this way after 12 years of marriage. But her tears weren't enough to sway me. I'd had enough of her lies. In a fit of rage, I hurled my coffee cup across the room, and it shattered against the front of the microwave. For the first time in this entire mess, I had her full attention. The look on her face told me she'd never seen me like this before. I leaned over the table, raising my voice, and demanded to know who Tom Reed was. She tried to back away, moving toward the sink, avoiding the conversation altogether. "He's just a friend," she muttered, but I wasn't having it. I kept pushing. "Did you sleep with him?" She hesitated. Then, in a voice full of regret, she admitted to it. She said she was sorry and begged me to stop. By now, she was sobbing, clinging to the sink like it was the only thing holding her up. Just as I was about to process all of this, Emily's phone started ringing. Her eyes darted from me to the phone, and she said it was Tom calling. I pressed the speakerphone button and greeted him, my voice dripping with bitterness. Tom sounded flustered, asking why I'd called his work number the night before. I told him I'd be seeing him later that day. Emily stood frozen, clearly terrified of what was happening. Tom asked if everything was okay, and she barely managed to tell him that I knew everything. I cut in, telling Tom I had things to take care of in the morning but would drop by his place in the afternoon, and that he might want to keep emergency services on speed dial. He didn't say anything after that, just stayed quiet until I hung up the call. I stuffed Emily's phone in my pocket and turned back to her. She was still standing at the sink, shaking, not saying a word. I told her I was leaving, but before I walked out, I asked her one last question. Who was the guy Anna was seeing? That question seemed to hit her like a punch to the gut. She begged me not to ask, but I wasn't backing down. After a moment, she blurted out the name, Ethan Hayes. She then told me she'd be back in the afternoon, and that I should have my things packed up and out of the house by then. She said her mother would be staying with the girls for a while, and that I could come back to pick up anything I couldn't fit in the car. Oh, and she made it clear I shouldn't try to contact her, and should give updates to her mom instead. Emily stood there, silent and stiff, as I walked out the door. Of course, as I stepped outside, I had no clue what my next move was. I decided it was time to head to the office and find Jake. He was a friend, and I figured he needed to hear the whole mess about Emily and Anna. It didn't take a genius to figure out that Anna must have met Ethan at work, and it wasn't hard to guess that Tom and Ethan were probably friends. Maybe Tom needed a date and Anna played matchmaker. I might have been simplifying things, but the pieces seemed to fit well enough. When I got to the office, Jake wasn't there, probably off gambling or getting into some other kind of trouble, as usual. So I called him on his cell and spilled the beans about Emily and Anna having boyfriends. I explained that all their so-called Tupperware parties and meetings were just cover-ups for social gatherings. He didn't believe me at first, and honestly, I wasn't surprised. I told him to ask Anna about a guy named Ethan Hayes, who worked with her at Gilbert Engineering. I had a hunch that Anna introduced Emily to someone there. Jake went quiet for a second, and then told me he knew Ethan from high school, which added another layer to the mess. When I mentioned Tom Reed, describing him as a tall, skinny guy, Jake still seemed to be in disbelief. But I told him Emily had confessed and would probably warn Anna soon, just like she had tried to dance around the truth with me before finally admitting to it. After that conversation, I headed to HR and put in a request for a short leave. There was no way I could focus on work with everything going on. It only took about 10 minutes to hand off my tasks to another draftsman. As I was wrapping things up, Emily's cell phone rang. Anna's name popped up on the caller ID. I couldn't resist, I answered, pretending to be Emily. Anna sounded panicked, apologizing immediately and saying she thought she was talking to Emily. She told me Jake had found out about everything at work. Still playing along, I pressed her for details, letting my frustration and disgust come through. Anna admitted she was planning to pick Emily up and help her pack because, apparently, Emily was going to move back in with her parents for a while. That part caught me off guard. I paused for a moment, imagining Anna's panic on the other end of the line. Then I told her to give Ethan a heads up because Jake was on his way, and I hinted that Ethan might need a head start. Anna's voice broke in shock, and she exclaimed, "No, God, no," before hanging up. I couldn't help but shake my head at the nerves on that woman. After that, I got practical. We only had one credit card, so I canceled it right away. Changing the PIN on the ATM card only took about 5 minutes. I wasn't sure what to do with our checking account just yet, so I left it alone for the time being. I needed access to pay the bills anyway. All I could do was hope Emily didn't take any bank receipts with her. My phone rang again, but this time it was Jake. He had tracked Ethan down at the Gilbert office and chased him into the parking lot, where things got physical. Jake had landed himself in jail, and needed me to call his brother in Lancaster to post bail. After making the call, there wasn't much else I could do for Jake. So I grabbed lunch at Taco Bell and then went to visit my parents. I filled them in on everything, and Mom didn't hesitate to offer to help with the girls. She stayed with me during the week, and Lily and Sophie would stay with my folks on the weekends. With that settled, it was time for me to deal with Tom Reed. When I got to Gilbert Engineering, the guys in the drafting department were eager to fill me in on the drama that had gone down earlier that morning. Apparently, Jake had caught Ethan before he could get to his BMW. Jake threw Ethan over the hood of a car and started pounding his face. The guards tried to break it up, but it wasn't until one of them hit Jake with a stun gun that they managed to pull him off Ethan. They hauled Jake off to jail, and Ethan had to be taken to the hospital in an ambulance. One of the guys pointed me in the direction of Tom Reed's office, but when I got there, it was empty. Looked like Tom had quit that morning and disappeared. As I was leaving, I walked past Anna's desk, but she wasn't there either. I guess she was still technically employed, but her absence was noticeable. 10 minutes later, I had Tom's home address and was on my way. It was a small ranch house with no garage. A white Lexus sat in the driveway, its trunk and back doors wide open. I walked up to the house just as Tom came out, his arms full of clothes. The second he spotted me, he dropped everything and bolted back inside like a scared rabbit. I had to laugh at the sight of him panicking. I wasn't Jake. I wasn't going to beat him up. The place looked like it came furnished. I figured that's why he didn't have a moving truck. In another 10 minutes, he probably would have been gone, skipping town without a trace. I wasn't going to chase him, though. Instead, I took my time looking around for anything interesting. The first thing I found was his cell phone, lying on the table next to a folder with his passport and some personal documents. A cute little laptop sat on the dining table. I didn't see much else, so I grabbed the phone and laptop, along with the folder, and left. I wasn't interested in doing anything illegal, so I resisted the urge to wreck his car. But I couldn't help myself entirely. I let the air out of one of his tires. He'd have to unpack everything just to get to the spare. That ought to slow him down, I thought as I left, knowing Tom would get the message. Next stop was the jail to see Jake. Jake and his brother were busy dealing with the legal mess when I stopped by the jail. I just waved and gave him a small smile. He seemed to have everything under control, so there wasn't much else for me to do there. By the time I got home, Mom had already started dinner. We talked briefly, then I headed to my office to look through the stuff I had taken from Tom's place. I hadn't even had a chance to dig into it before Beth and Britt got home from school. I figured it was best to explain everything before they started asking questions. But I didn't get the chance. Lily rushed over, all eager, asking why Grandma was there and where Mom was. I told her that their mom and I decided to take a break and that she'd be staying with her parents for a while. Sophie looked pleased, and with a smug grin, she declared she'd won a bet with Lily. She explained that they had argued about whether Mom was cheating on me. Beth didn't deny it but clarified that she hadn't said anything about cheating, just that they weren't naive and knew something was up. Then, she admitted that Britt had been right all along and that their mom was, in fact, cheating. Beth's reaction floored me. She seemed more surprised that I had figured it out than anything else and even criticized me for being slow and too trusting. Then, in an unusual moment of tenderness, Sophie put her hand on my shoulder, trying to comfort me. It was surreal. My own 12-year-old daughter trying to console me while I grappled with the mess that had become my marriage. Sophie went on to tell me a story from a couple of weeks back. Apparently, one Saturday when Emily and Anna claimed they were heading to the King of Prussia for some shopping, Mom wouldn't let the girls come along. She brushed it off, saying it was an adult day out, and that she'd make it up to them later. But when the girls got to school on Monday, a couple of classmates told them they had seen Emily with a guy in Nobles Grove. The girls dismissed it at first, calling them liars, until one of them pulled out a photo on her phone as proof. Even then, Beth had tried to believe there was a reasonable explanation, but Britt wasn't buying it. She was certain Mom was cheating. I asked why they hadn't said anything to me. They just shrugged like it wasn't worth mentioning. Then Sophie dropped another bomb. Nina Rogers's parents had seen Emily, Anna, and two men at TGI Fridays in Allentown. They'd mentioned it to Nina, who then passed it along to the girls. I just sat there, dumbfounded. It took a moment for all of that to sink in. Thank God Mom had invited us to dinner. We kept things light at the table, avoiding the elephant in the room. I even apologized for the awkward tension before dessert, and luckily, the twins left the topic alone for the rest of the night. Later, once I had some time to myself, I finally started poking around Tom's laptop. Just as I was getting into it, his cell phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Anna's phone, and the garbled message was something along the lines of, Daxri for Sinfuli J. It didn't take long to figure out it was Emily. The message read, Dear Tom, sorry for the trouble. Love, Emily. That was all I needed to see to confirm they were together. I couldn't resist the temptation, so I typed out TAJ and sent it back, letting her know I had Tom's phone. Then, I spent the next couple of hours digging through Tom's files and folders. While I didn't find any direct emails between him and Emily, there were plenty of interesting messages between Tom and some old buddies in Lancaster. What I read was enough to shake me to my core. Emily and I had been together for nearly our whole lives, but somehow, in less than a year, she had gotten closer to Tom than she ever was with me. I felt the sting of betrayal deep in my gut, and before I knew it, tears were rolling down my face. I couldn't remember the last time I'd cried like that. Her lies, her deception. It hurt in ways I wasn't prepared for. I printed out several of the emails, along with a dozen photographs, though none of the pictures were explicit. They were all safe enough for mixed company, but the meaning behind them was enough to make me sick. Lily poked her head in the door and asked if she could call her mom. I didn't feel like I could say no, so I handed her the phone. My mom stayed with the twins while they talked to Emily. Later, she told me they didn't hold back, blaming Emily for everything that had gone wrong. The conversation didn't last long, less than 5 minutes, but from what Mom overheard, it seemed the girls weren't trying to hide their anger. Going back to Tom's files, I found out more than I wanted to. Tom had been hired for some alternative energy project in Spain. His start date was in 6 weeks, and it seemed he had already prepped all his documents for the trip, everything except my passport. He'd have to figure that out soon enough, but I doubted he'd go to the police about it. He hadn't even booked his plane tickets yet. Then, I stumbled on a letter he had written to a close friend, and that's when I found out the real plan. Emily was going to divorce me after joining Tom in Spain. She knew I'd never let her take the girls out of the country, so she was planning to declare me an unfit father. The letter didn't spell out how she planned to do it, but it was clear she was willing to go far enough to take away my visitation rights or custody. The whole thing was disgusting, cold, calculated, and cruel. I printed out several copies of the letter. I wished I had something directly from Emily, but this would have to do. Later, after Mom had fallen asleep watching Leno, I helped her into bed. The girls were already in bed, and I crashed on the couch, drained from the emotional toll of the day. For empty beer bottles sat on the coffee table by the time I drifted off. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and bacon. Mom, as always, had breakfast ready. The girls were already at the table, finishing up their cereal. They teased me a bit, the way kids do, before I got around to cooking their eggs. We kept the conversation light and casual until it was time for them to catch the bus. I sat the girls down and told them I had something serious to talk about. I explained that their mother might try to claim I was an unfit parent in order to keep them with her, but I wanted them to know the truth. I told them I was open to shared custody, if that's what would make them happy, but there was no way I'd give up my right to be in their lives. I made sure they understood that they shouldn't feel like they had to choose sides, but also warned them to be careful and not fall for any lies. Sophie, being the tough one, looked me in the eye and told me they were smarter than I thought. She said they loved their mom but weren't going to let her ruin me. She gave me a smile, and Lily, always the quieter one, gave me a thumbs up before they headed off to school. Once they were gone, Mom refilled my coffee and sat down with me. She told me to take it easy, reassuring me that everyone was on my side and I wasn't alone in this. I nodded, feeling a little more grounded after our talk. After a shower and shave, I decided to dress a bit sharper than usual. With 3 phones in my pocket, my own and the 2 I'd taken from Tom, I felt a bit strange. I made a mental note to pick up a charger for Tom's phone, even though I doubted I'd really need it. Better to be prepared. I had an appointment at the Family Services office, so I checked in and waited for the caseworker to call me in. When I finally got called, I was shocked to see who it was. Maya Phillips, someone I hadn't seen in over a decade. Back in high school, she had been part of that goth crowd. Pink hair, black lipstick, and a whole lot of dark eyeliner. I never expected to see her working in a place like this, let alone handling my case. Her desk nameplate read, J. Phillips, so it seemed she hadn't married, though she looked nothing like her old self. Gone were the punk rock looks. Now, she seemed perfectly normal. "John, what can I do for you?" she asked, interrupting my surprise. I fumbled for a second, mentioning how much she had changed since high school. Maya just chuckled at my awkwardness, which made me apologize for the comment. She waved it off, telling me to relax. She shared that midway through college, she realized she didn't need to hide behind a costume anymore, that she could face the world as herself. She joked that she'd been normal for almost a decade now and was a lot more comfortable this way. But she admitted she still had a bad habit of sounding patronizing at times and apologized if she put her foot in her mouth during our conversation. We moved on to the reason for my visit. I asked if there were any files or reports on me. Maya checked and confirmed there was nothing under either my name or Emily's, which suggested there hadn't been any claims of mistreatment or anything concerning our kids. I mentioned that I had twin daughters, Lily and Sophie, who were 12 years old. Then, I got to the heart of it. I told Maya that my wife was planning to leave me and take the girls with her. Maya wasn't surprised by the situation. Apparently, it wasn't that uncommon. But she asked if I had any idea why Emily would do this. I pointed out that there was no paper trail yet, no accusations, no medical or police reports, nothing that showed I was being set up. Maya explained that just because their system didn't show anything didn't mean I was in the clear. She speculated that Emily might be gathering evidence, like medical records or reports, before bringing a case to their office. I was skeptical, and Maya could tell. She reassured me that she wasn't saying I was doomed or anything like that, just that I should be cautious. She asked why I thought Emily would go this far. I hesitated but decided to show her the email I'd found from Tom. I handed her a copy across the desk. When she asked how I got it, I admitted I'd accessed Tom's computer illegally, fully aware that the email wouldn't hold up in court because of that. I used the word conspiracy, though I wasn't even sure I knew what that meant legally. I was confused and just trying to figure out how to protect myself and my daughters, especially since hiring a lawyer seemed financially out of reach. Maya leaned back in her chair, rocking slightly, her eyes locked on mine. She finally leaned forward and suggested I come back the next morning so she could look into things further. I agreed, asking if I could keep the copy of the letter. She said that was fine, and as I left, she smiled and told me it was nice to see me again. I smiled back, feeling like I'd seen a different side of her. Without any connections to decent lawyers, I went the old-fashioned route and picked one out of the phone book. I knew Emily was planning to file for divorce, and I wanted to make sure I secured my position before she made any moves. Not knowing what the financial situation was going to look like, I paid the lawyer in cash up front for the whole package. I told him to move things along as quickly as possible. I was willing to give Emily the house since it was worth less than the mortgage anyway, but I made it clear I wasn't going to give up on joint custody of the girls. In fact, I said I'd take full custody if it came to that. I agreed to pay child support, but no alimony. On my way to grab some lunch, Jake called, saying he needed a place to stay. I told him he could stay with me, so we arranged to meet at Taco Bell. When I got there, I saw Jake grinning like he had won the lottery. I asked what had him in such a good mood, and he told me the story. A friend from Community General Hospital had given him some juicy details about Ethan. Apparently, Anna had gone to visit Ethan while he was in the hospital, but Ethan's wife and kids showed up while she was there. Things got ugly fast, and hospital security had to throw Anna out. Jake had gone by Gilbert Engineering later that day to talk to her, but by the time he got there, she was already gone. I asked about Ethan's family situation, but Jake admitted he didn't know much about why Ethan's wife didn't live with him or why he never went home on weekends. But he didn't care about those details anymore. Jake had decided to take the week off work to get his own affairs in order. Since Mom was living with me now, we'd need to figure out where Jake would stay, but I was more than happy to help him out. Jake was set on heading back to his place to grab some clothes and personal items, figuring Anna wouldn't be home. He had no intention of talking to her ever again. Later, on my way to meet my insurance agent, I got a call from David Armstrong, Emily's father. He asked me to join a meeting with him, Emily, her sister Laura, and their mother to sort things out. He mentioned Emily was in despair, and her mother wasn't being much help. Even though I had no idea what they were hoping to accomplish, I agreed to be there in 20 minutes. It was a somber gathering. I brought a folder of evidence with me and skipped the coffee, already prepared for the worst. David started the meeting. John, Emily thinks you're overreacting. She claims you got angry and pressured her into saying things that aren't true, just to calm you down. She's insisting she's done nothing wrong and has no idea why you're kicking her out. I could tell Emily had painted a pretty embellished version of events for her parents. It didn't surprise me that she'd avoid admitting to her infidelity, but blaming me for everything? That got under my skin. David then asked me, "What do you expect us to do here? Do you want me to call her a liar or say you're mistaken?" I explained that Emily had tried to downplay her actions, saying she didn't have a boyfriend and that she just had a few drinks with coworkers from Anna's office. I pointed out the fact that she had over 80 phone conversations with this friend in the last month alone. I then asked David how often she called him or her mother, trying to make it clear that something was off. Emily wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Next, I brought up Tom's cell phone. No one said a word, so I handed the phone to Laura and asked her to read the text message Emily sent to Tom right after I confronted her. The message apologized for the trouble and ended with, "Love, Emily." When Laura read it aloud, Emily covered her face with her hands. David shook his head in disbelief. I then pulled out the photos, ones from an outing where Emily and Anna claimed they had been shopping at the King of Prussia Mall. In reality, they'd been at Nebelgrove with Tom. David looked at the photos, noticing that Emily was holding Tom's hand in several of them. He asked Emily directly, "You expect me to believe he's just a friend?" Emily's tears started flowing as the reality of the situation sank in. I continued, showing more photos from other outings, Olive Garden, Red Lobster. It was clear Emily had been lying about her whereabouts. I thought about bringing up the stains on her underwear, but decided it wasn't the right moment for that. David apologized for bringing me into such a mess, clearly upset at having been deceived by his own daughter. He shook my hand as I left, and Emily stormed out of the room, sobbing like a child. David assured me the situation wouldn't be ignored. When I got home, Mom and Jake had already set up a fold-out bed in the small extra room where I kept my computer. Jake had brought over a pile of clothes and some personal items from his house. Luckily for him, Anna hadn't been home when he went over. But the most interesting thing that awaited me wasn't Jake. It was the mail. Among the usual letters, there was an official envelope addressed to Emily from the passport office. I knew I shouldn't open it, but I couldn't resist. Inside was a family passport with a photo of Emily and the girls. I remembered the girls mentioning they had gotten their picture taken, but I hadn't realized it was for this. Naturally, my passport wasn't included in the package. I called David right away and asked him to let Emily know the passport had arrived. I made it clear that if she needed it, she could send Tom over to pick it up because I'd only hand it to him. Normally, I'd be at work when letters like this showed up, so I never would have known about it if I hadn't been home. David said he and his wife had already told Emily she needed to find another place to stay, and they had no idea where she was planning to go. They seemed frustrated with her, which was some small comfort. He promised to pass along the message about the passport. That night at dinner, the conversation was mostly about the girls. Lily, with a shy smile, mentioned that Maya from Family Services had visited their school and spoke with both of them. They'd missed Jim in geography because of the long talk. Both Beth and Sophie said Maya seemed to like me based on what she'd said during the meeting, even though she only talked to me for about an hour. Before we could dive deeper into that conversation, Laura interrupted dinner with a phone call, asking to meet up. I agreed, and we met at McDonald's. At the meeting, Laura shared Emily's side of things. She started by blaming Anna, saying that Anna's affair with Jake had been thrilling for Emily, who saw it as romantic. According to Emily, life with me had been predictable and reliable, but it lacked the excitement she craved. That's when she got involved with Tom Reed after he started at Gilbert. While Anna and Ethan had their affair, Emily and Tom were left alone together, which led to their own relationship. Laura admitted that Emily had fallen hard for Tom. He had mesmerized her with stories about his adventures and promises of a life in Spain. The thought of a new life abroad excited Emily, and she couldn't bring herself to end the affair. But the real issue wasn't leaving me. It was leaving the girls. Emily knew I'd never let her take them out of the country, so she was planning to find a way to make me look like an unfit parent. Laura explained that after Emily had spoken to the girls, she realized they were closer to me than to her. That's when Emily decided she wouldn't pursue custody as long as I agreed to a divorce without making any waves. Laura then casually asked if I had Emily's passport on me. That question raised all kinds of red flags. I suspected Emily still had hopes of taking the girls with her, even though she had supposedly backed off on custody. The family passport seemed to be key to whatever plan she was cooking up. I'd had enough of the conversation at that point. I leaned back, looked Laura in the eye, and said, "Laura, my coffee's gone cold. I'm going home to take a hot shower. Don't call me anymore." Laura, looking confused, asked, "What the hell is wrong? Why are you angry? You know exactly what you did. Do you two honestly think I'm that stupid?" I spat the words at Laura as I stood to leave. "Go back to your sister and tell her there's no way in hell she's getting my daughters. Since you're so keen on helping her, do just that, but I'll ask you to never speak to my girls again." As I walked out of Mickey D's, I noticed Laura already on her cell phone. I could only guess who she was calling. I got to the family services office early, before it even opened. When Maya arrived, she greeted me with a smile and a Starbucks cup in hand. "You couldn't stay away from me, could you?" she teased, motioning for me to sit down. She apologized for not bringing me a coffee, which was ironic since I was still reeling from my tense encounter with Laura. "I think you know that I spoke to your daughters yesterday," Maya said, watching me closely. I nodded and smiled, though I felt strangely out of place. Talking to Maya left me tongue-tied, just like it had the last time. Having spent my whole life with Emily, I never really learned how to talk to other women. It showed now more than ever. "Is something wrong, John?" she asked, sensing my discomfort. "Apart from the obvious?" I muttered, trying not to sound sarcastic. "No, nothing else." "I'm so sorry, Maya," I added quickly, feeling foolish. "I think I should leave. I'm not handling all this very well today. I'll call you later." Before I could get up, Maya stopped me. "Before you go, I want you to know that I've put in for a restraining order against your wife," she said. "I can't stop her from seeing the girls, but I can prevent her from taking them out of state or blocking your access to them. She'll get the notice before noon." That bit of news put a smile on my face, the first real one I'd managed in a while. I thanked her and left, heading straight for the nearest Starbucks. The coffee smelled good, but the weight of everything that had been happening suddenly felt overwhelming. I drove around aimlessly, trying to clear my head, but nothing seemed to help. When I finally got home, Jake was there to update me. Anna had moved back to her parents' place near Afrida, and Jake was just going to his house to pack a few things before deciding whether to sell or rent the place. He spent his morning running around to the bank, his insurance company, and his lawyer, trying to find some way to get compensation from Gilbert Engineering. Unfortunately, as his lawyer explained, the company had no policies against workplace relationships, so Jake wasn't getting anywhere with his claims. Later, Jake mentioned that Ethan had been discharged from the hospital, and while Jake was there, Ethan's wife approached him. She thanked Jake for his help, explaining that she'd been trying for years to patch things up with Ethan but hadn't had any luck. I could see how tired Jake was of all the drama by the look on his face. That evening, I sat on the porch nursing a beer when Mom came out with a meatloaf sandwich and joined me in silence. She mentioned that Dad would be coming for dinner and staying the night, and we fell back into quiet conversation. Not long after, Maya showed up. Mom took her cue and retreated inside, leaving us alone on the porch. Maya declined the cold beer I offered her, and we sat together for a few minutes in silence. Finally, she broke the quiet. "I served Emily her papers about an hour ago. She's staying with Laura, and she's not taking it well." I drained the last of my beer, feeling a strange mix of relief and guilt. It feels good on the surface, but why do I still feel so bad? "There's no winning in these situations, John," Maya said softly. "Sometimes it's just about finding the least bad option." I pulled out another beer but hesitated, putting it back in the fridge. "Would you be able to explain all of this to the girls?" I asked, looking up at her. "I get along with them, but no matter how carefully I say it, They might think I'm blaming their mom. I don't want to push them away. Maya nodded. How about tonight at 7? I agreed, and she stood to leave. But halfway to her car, she turned back and smiled. I smiled too, knowing that maybe things were starting to shift in the right direction. Later that evening, Maya spent a good amount of time talking with Beth and Britt, easing them through the reality of the situation. Meanwhile, Jake and I occupied ourselves with cleaning out his house, removing anything that reminded him of Anna. Maya started visiting our house several times a week after that, mostly spending time with my mom and the girls. I noticed, though, that she was avoiding me for some reason. While I didn't mind, it still made me curious. One night, after the girls had gone to bed, Maya sat beside me on the couch. I felt the urge to talk to her, but before I could say anything, she broke the silence. Got any wine? Preferably with a cork, she joked. I laughed and told her I only had wine with screw caps. She found that amusing and asked for something red. I poured some wine into a jug, and as we drank, I finally gathered the courage to ask about the girls. Maya reassured me that Beth and Britt were fine and didn't really need to see her as often as they had been. What she said next caught me off guard. Honestly, I've been coming over to see you. Not the girls, she confessed. I was confused. After all, she rarely said much to me during her visits. She explained that she thought I might have had some unspoken rule about not fraternizing with clients, which we both laughed about. To break the tension, she brought up tattoos, mentioning how surprised she was that I hadn't asked to see hers. I admitted I had 4 tattoos from my high school days, 3 of which were visible, and 1 in a more discreet place. Playfully, she suggested a game of finding each other's tattoos, making sure we kept quiet so we wouldn't wake the girls. Later, after Maya left, I couldn't shake the feeling that the twins might have had an inkling of what was going on, but I pushed the thought aside. A few weeks later, I instructed my lawyer to finalize and deliver the divorce papers to Emily. She was still living with Laura, but I never heard any response from her. Time passed, and my dad's health started to decline. Mom spent most of her time with him, leaving me and the girls to manage on our own. Luckily, by the time summer arrived, school was out, and the twins spent most of the summer with my mom. Eventually, Dad moved to a nursing home, and Jake and I helped Mom prepare her house for sale before she moved back in with me. Maya continued to visit the girls at Emily's place throughout the summer, and she spent 3 or 4 nights a week with me. The girls were always happy to see her, and I appreciated the extra attention they were giving me too. By this point, I was pretty sure they knew what was happening between Maya and me, but it didn't seem to bother them. Emily called the girls about once a week, but their conversations were always short. According to her mother, the calls were strained and tense. The girls didn't even bother to tell me when Emily called anymore. Jake's divorce from Anna was finalized around that time, but I had no clue where things stood with my own divorce. Jake also decided to start his own surveying business and asked me to join him, but I didn't have the money to invest. That's when my mom stepped in. When Medicare started covering Dad's expenses, she decided I should use what was left for business. I think she saw it as an investment in my future. So, 3 months later, Jake and I had our own small surveying company. My drawing skills even evolved into drafting designs for clients. About a week into the new school year, Emily came to visit the twins. They expected to meet Maya at the guidance office, but instead, they were greeted by their mother. They did their best to be polite, but they were clearly distant. Emily apologized, saying she loved them and was sorry for how things turned out. She told them she was heading to Spain to see the windmills and promised to send postcards and call on their birthdays. She even mentioned extravagant Christmas gifts. The girls said Emily cried as she left, but I never got a call from her to say goodbye. A week later, Emily's parents showed up at my house. They apologized again for what had happened, but made no effort to justify Emily's actions. Since Sophie and Lily were their only grandchildren, they asked if they could still see them, and I agreed. They also mentioned that Laura felt too ashamed to speak to me, stuck between loyalty to her sister and her parents. 2 months later, my divorce was officially finalized. Maya and I celebrated with dinner at Red Lobster, a rare night without the girls. I think the twins were happy for me. They didn't say it, but their smiles said everything. We spent the night at a Holiday Inn, and the next morning, the girls greeted me with grins from ear to ear. A year later, things were going well, though my father passed away. Mom thought about moving to Florida with her sister, but she didn't want to leave the girls. The twins, however, encouraged her to go and suggested Maya take her place, even if she wasn't as good of a cook. They also insisted they were old enough for separate rooms, and the plan just made sense. For the girls' birthdays, Emily sent cards, but there were no calls. She also sent postcards of windmills from Spain, though I never really understood why. At Christmas, she mailed them embroidered dresses, completely unaware that they'd outgrown that style. The girls didn't mind. They had long moved on from caring what their mother thought. As for Jake, he was thrilled to discover that Ethan had taken a significant downgrade, now teaching electronics at a vocational school. Ethan wasn't married anymore, and Anna had moved to California and remarried. Tom Reed didn't last long in his new job, and though he was back in the States, no one knew where he'd ended up. Jake often said I'd let Tom off too easy, and maybe he was right. Oddly enough, the girls kept receiving postcards from Emily, each one featuring windmills but with no real message, just generic sentiments. David told me Emily had called them a few times from her job at a travel agency in Barcelona. She never mentioned Tom, and she didn't talk about their past. Maya and I quietly got married in Maryland. A year later, she was pregnant, and Sophie and Lily were just as excited as we were. They joked about how they were going to have a little goth sister, though they never explained the joke to me. As for the postcards of windmills, their meaning remained a mystery.